What's good, Kanekis? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well. Stagflation. Stagflation, the nightmare every central banker dreads. I'm going to explain to you exactly what it is and why it definitely looks like that's going to be what's coming up next after this period of inflation that we've experienced. But before we get into it, please hit the like button, subscribe as well if you are new and you haven't already. Let's get into it. So you might remember in an earlier video, I think it was the first finance video I did about inflation and the Federal Reserve, where I explained that the Federal Reserve has two mandates: to keep unemployment as low as possible and to keep prices stable by inflating. So let's read directly from Google because Google summarizes it perfectly. It says the Fed's dual mandate, as established by Congress, requires the Federal Reserve to promote both maximum employment and price stability. This means the Fed aims to keep the economy operating near its full potential while also maintaining a stable level of inflation, typically around 2%. Remember, I questioned how an increase of 2% in prices each year equates to stable prices. So Google summarizes the reason for the price stability as this. This keeps inflation under control, preventing both deflation, falling prices, and excessive inflation, rising prices. The Fed's goal is to maintain a stable and predictable inflation rate, typically around 2%, to avoid disruptions to the economy and maintain the purchasing power of consumers. The purchasing power is only maintained if you're getting a raise of 2% each year. If you are not, your purchasing power is actually going down. So why does the Fed want 2% inflation? They need it, like I said, to devalue the debt, to devalue the government's debt. That is why they want inflation, because the cheaper money gets in the future, the less valuable the debt is. So what does this have to do with stagflation? Stagflation, ladies and gentlemen, is the phenomenon where prices increase, which is the inflation part, but the economy is stagnant or failing, which is the stag part. So what causes it? What causes stagflation? Once again, summarizing using Google, the summary is absolutely phenomenal. It says stagflation is a combination of stagnant economic growth and high inflation, which is typically caused by a combination of supply shocks and demand-side weakness coupled with policy missteps. Focus on the policy missteps because that's actually what's causing this current period of stagflation that we're about to enter. I think we're already in it, to be honest. We're just waiting for them to confirm it. They're always late. They're always the last ones to find out. So the first one is expansionary monetary policy. So they explain it as if the government or central bank increases the money supply too quickly, it can lead to inflation, even if economic growth is weak. We have seen this inflation happen in the M2 money supply, where they printed to infinity during the pandemic. Second one is high budget deficits, which is currently happening. Government borrowing to finance deficits can put upward pressure on interest rates and potentially increase inflationary pressure. We have seen the US constantly engage in trade deficits with China, the rest of the world. So basically they're consuming more than they're producing. And also on the government side, they are spending more than they're bringing in taxes. And actually, I realized that I had noticed that the Federal Reserve is stuck. Central banks are stuck. So reading from what I tweeted back in November 2024, if the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates to save the economy, which is one of their mandates to promote employment, inflation returns. It returns because with lower interest rates, it's cheaper to borrow. So banks give credit more freely. So the money supply increases. If they raise interest rates to defeat inflation, government debt, interest payments increase. If that increases, the government will be in big trouble and banks will be in big trouble. As we have seen, the unrealized losses suffered by many commercial banks increased in 2020. So why did this increase? It increased because the Federal Reserve increased interest rates. So banks were holding bonds, and the way bonds work is that if the rates increase, if the interest rate increase, the value of the bond goes down. It's like a seesaw. And that's precisely what happened. So this is a graph of the interest rates, the federal funds rate. That's the rate that the Federal Reserve sets. You can see right about 2020, 2022, it was near zero, practically zero. Then they increased it, which is why the unrealized losses spiked in the banks, in the commercial banks, and also the government's interest payments increased. Now, guys, I want you to look at this chart. They held it near zero after the great financial crisis of '08. They held it low to stimulate the economy. So lots of companies, the governments, they just borrowed as much money as they could during this period to stimulate the economy. They leveraged up their books. The Federal Reserve increased the interest rates in 2016. That was the first rate hike after the zero interest rate policy. They increased it to about 2%. They brought it back down during the pandemic. Then they increased it again. This creates distortions. These are policy missteps. They are policy missteps that lead to stagflation. With the high interest rates, companies can no longer afford to have their employees. Employees become expensive, consumers are struggling because they can't afford to keep up with their credit card payments because the interest rates have gone up. So their profits come down. So they have to do these mass layoffs as we have seen very recently. This is the stag part I'm explaining. So as people are laid off, company profits are decreasing, the economy slows. As the economy slows, the Federal Reserve thinks, maybe we should stimulate the economy by lowering interest rates. But they cannot do that because inflation is already high. And if they decrease interest rates, inflation is going to go back up. And then the cycle keeps going, and it spirals. So remember what I said about the Fed's dual mandate. The first is to keep unemployment low, and the second is to keep inflation steady or stable at around 2%. So what we're looking at here is the Fed's funds rate. I'm going to overlay it with two charts, the first of which is going to be the US unemployment rate, which shows us this. Each time the Fed cuts, unemployment goes up. So the Fed is always the last to find out, right? And by the time they find out, unemployment is already on the ascent. So they cut the interest rates so that the economy can be stimulated and companies can borrow more and they hire more people. So focus on that. Each time they cut, unemployment goes up. It precedes it. And they've started the cutting cycle. It started last year. They're currently holding it steady because they're afraid inflation will come back. The next one I'm going to overlay on here is going to be the inflation rate year over year, which is here in purple. We can see inflation is around 2.4%. So it's close to the Fed's target. The annual inflation rate is close to the Fed's target. But unemployment hasn't caught up yet. It hasn't caught up yet. The last time we had like clear stagflation in the UK and in the US was around the 1970s. So that's roughly in this zone here. And as you can see, inflation was high, around 13%. Good Lord. Inflation was high around 13%. Unemployment also rose to around 9%, 9%, and then it rose again. Inflation all the way up to around 14%. Unemployment was close to 10, 11%. Today we're at 2. Unemployment is roughly around just below 4.5%, 4.2%. When unemployment catches up, that is when the stagflation period begins and the Fed will have their hands tied. To be honest, their hands are already tied. Like I said, they're stuck. The best thing that the Federal Reserve can do is to do nothing. Let the market decide what rates to set. Because if the market decides, the interest rates will naturally go higher because that's then going to attract more money. That's the issue the dollar is having right now. It is being devalued actively by the Federal Reserve by the excessive money printing, and people are demanding higher interest rates because they know that the rates they're getting on their bonds is less than the inflation rate. Do you understand now that they are stuck? They cannot do anything, and they're choosing not to even think about stagflation. Last year, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, was asked, what does he think about stagflation? Is it a possibility? And he said this.
Last year's level of growth was very high, 3.4% in, I guess, the fourth quarter, and probably not going to be sustained and would come down. But that would be our forecast. That wouldn't be stagflation. That would still be to a very healthy level of growth. And of course, with inflation, we will return inflation to 2%, and that won't be. So I don't see the stag or the inflation, actually.
He doesn't see the stag or the inflation. Can he not see it, or is he choosing not to see it? Stagflation sees you, though, Jerome Powell. It's playing peekaboo. It is there waiting in the shadows. It is there. It is waiting. And it is coming. Protect yourself, guys. Protect yourself. The only way to protect yourself, in my opinion, is with gold, is with silver. Because if you think about it, like I said, company profits are decreasing, meaning stocks are going to suffer because their earnings per share are going to decrease. So stocks aren't safe. Think about real estate. If consumers are struggling, if people are losing their jobs, they cannot keep up with their mortgage payments. They cannot keep up with their rents. So real estate isn't safe. You think about bonds. The Federal Reserve knows they have to decrease the interest rates so that they can stimulate the economy. If they decrease it, bonds will go up in value, sure. But they cannot decrease it because that's going to bring back inflation. So the interest, the yield that they're paying you with the bonds is almost always going to be lower than the inflation rate. So you're guaranteed a loss. So bonds aren't safe. Where else can you go? Yet another case for gold. Yet another case for silver. Buy it now. It seems to be correcting at the moment. So I can't recommend it enough. Check out the video I did on how to buy gold and silver. Honestly, do it now. Buy a bit each month. Dollar cost average into it. Don't be greedy. Do not be greedy. Just buy a bit every month. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the like button, subscribe as well if you're new and you haven't already. Do share this video out with friends, family, people who you believe will need to know about this. Just share it out because I think it affects everyone. Even if you aren't invested in stocks or real estate, you are still going to be affected by this because cash also loses value, which I explained in this video over here about how you're always invested, even if you don't know it. Thank you guys very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.